After recently having purchased the hardware that's utilised in the PlayStation 5, lots of people were asking me, can we make this run Windows? Right, so we have already seen this box before. So for those of you that don't know, in here is our AMD BC250, which is the PlayStation 5 cut down and then whacked onto its own very special, unique board. Now, we have done a full video covering this, which is why there's a fan bolted on top not doing very much. But at the same time, we went through and we managed to get this running, gaming, and doing everything we needed it to do, but we were using Linux. But a lot of people were very curious, because with all of this power, admittedly in a very weird and quite unusual package, is there any way we can make Windows run on here? So I've got a few ideas to try and get Windows running, and it's just ridiculous, isn't it? Because the moment we try and do something where it's entirely Linux based, everyone's saying, why didn't you run Windows? Because you'd think, given this is primarily being used for people for a cheap gaming device, that would make sense. But people really wanted to know, can you run Windows on this? So today we're going to answer that question. Can we take the hardware that is used in the PlayStation 5 and make it run Windows? And also, do we actually get any performance from using Windows? So let's get right into it. So we're probably going to do this the same way we did it last time and just power it off another full computer, because that's the easiest way of getting power into this monstrosity. We'll need to add a little bit more cooling because it needs airflow through it. So yeah, let's get that done. We plonk this down here. 8-pin power connector. We will need some form of display out of this, so we'll use this adapter. There we go, it rests perfectly on the corner of the monitor. That's perfect. So now, if we turn this on, we'll just double check we get a display of some sort. Yeah, it still turns on. There we go. BC250, still registered. Actually, no, the system date is correct. Now, we did have this little one plugged in last time. That was giving us some airflow out here. Yes, I'm beginning to remember how much of a complete mess this all was to set up. At least now we've got a little bit of airflow flowing through. Not ideal, of course, but once again, it's a case of that'll do. I've already fetched us out our storage drive, which was a 4TB drive running Linux, which of course will be going, so we might need to format this anyway. Oh, it's all collapsing. We might need more support than that. What have I got? Ultravine. There we go. Medicinal, and also holds up BC250s. That's a good solution, that. Now, the only problems we do have are, this system runs GDDR6. I don't know how that does as Windows dealing with that system RAM. And also it has the issue of, I don't know if we're going to be able to bodge drivers on this, but I do have a backup plan if people actually want to see how this thing performs properly set up with an operating system that it kind of supports. There's an entire video. You can just go and watch that. That's actually the best advice I've got. Yes, I have had non-stop issues with this system on Linux with Wi-Fi, so if there's one thing that should work better, it'll probably be actual Wi-Fi support working, which would be lovely to have, to be honest. To be fair, points for reliability. Some things, when they're sat in a cupboard in the box they arrived in, don't work this smoothly. That should be everything. We've got storage set up, we know that works, keyboard, mouse, cooling, the BC250 PlayStation 5 thing actually set up and working. And on one of these, I do have a copy of Windows 11 IoT. For those that don't already know, IoT is the cut-down Internet of Things version that comes with nothing more than the operating system and a web browser. It's the only version we ever use on this channel because it's so good. We may have to unplug the hard drive and format it in another system because grub. Boot off the SanDisk Cruiser Glide first, which is set up for UEFI. Okay, we're installing Windows. Yes, this setup is as janky as it looks. But if this does work on Windows, then, you know, at least it's another selling point for this, because over on Linux, from the performance testing that I did, it was remarkably solid. I'm just going to angle that fan, though. Okay, will it actually install, though? If there was ever a version that would work, it would be this one. Okay, now this is where it's going to get a little bit grumpy with us, I think. So if we try and delete everything, does not support configure it through USB or IEE. At this point, some people will notice we do have an M2 slot on the board, but we don't want to use that because I want that for redundancy. I've got a plan in mind if we need to hijack things off that. So we might need to make a Windows on the go installation straight onto the drive, which we can do. We can do that. I don't know if it'll boot that way, but it doesn't want to boot this way. So let's get into that, because it's not going to install over USB. And then we need our drive out of here. And then we need a laptop. Grub is a pain even if you're using this properly. Grub can be even more of a pain if you're trying to conflict it with Windows installs that aren't fully legit. So we're going to go and run diskpart and clean the drive. Clean. There are no partitions on this drive to show. Good. Yep, no label 4 terabyte. Okay, we want to run Windows 11 IoT Enterprise. This is such a janky way of doing this. So we're going to try and preload the operating system onto USB so that it can boot to Windows over this. Yes, it is having activity on it, which is good. So we'll let that run through. It's just going to be grumpy doing what we're asking it to do because what we're asking it to do is stupid. It probably goes without saying that an SSD over a USB 3 port is immensely faster than flash storage is, so it's actually applying the Windows image to this drive really quickly. Well, that took absolutely no time at all to complete. That must have been about 2-3 minutes. In my experience back in the day, this was very hit or miss, but you never know, this could work. Well, it's detected Windows actually staying very cold. Okay, we've got Windows booting so far. Which is more than I was expecting, to be honest. Whether or not it can actually manage to start any services at all will be another question. Getting devices ready, and it's turned off again. We're still loading. Let's connect you to a network. Well, I don't have the internet. It's actually working, okay. Getting drivers on here is going to be a nightmare because what actually is supported? I don't know if that's an achievement, but the mouse is working. So let that go through, set itself up, and see what it does when it actually reaches the desktop. I can't quite believe it, but we are actually at the Windows desktop, which does not seem right on what is the PlayStation 5's APU. So what specs does Windows reckon we have? I'm so curious what it actually thinks. It knows it's a BC250. It's got 16 gigs of RAM. It knows it's got 16 gigs of RAM there. Optimistic given that it doesn't actually think it has a graphics card, which is fair. Understanding. Does it recognize that it's running GDDR6? I don't think it knows it's GDDR6. Well, it knows it's running over an SSD, but it also knows that its C drive is running over USB. I wonder what drivers it's missing. Okay, it's missing a PCI encryption decryption controller and graphics drivers. I think it's Navi based, but I don't know if it's going to run with Navi drivers. Right, let's install this wireless adapter real quick. I bought this adapter in a last-ditch attempt to actually see if maybe it would help things work over on Bazzite when we had this running on Linux, but it was just Bazzite itself was so unhappy with Wi-Fi. No, it seems to be working absolutely fine here on Windows, which is nice. I'm curious if we go to updates and we can see if Windows has detected any updates for this set of hardware, because usually it will give them to you under optional updates that are available. So why don't we see if Windows has got anything it wants to say about the PlayStation 5's APU. But I think if we try and download some Navi drivers, we'll see if we can bodge graphical acceleration on here. Or if not, at least run a stress test. Can we give ourselves some resolution here? I don't know what resolution we're working with, but it's very low. I mean, that's fair that it's realizing that. Can we manually go higher? Nope. 800 by 600 at 64 Hz. That's what it wants to run at, and we can't change from that, which makes sense because it's not a graphics card, it knows. AMD media drivers, AMD system drivers, you know what? We'll let it download those. Let's see, what if we go to AMD drivers? We'll download some preemptively. Browsing the web in 800 by 600 proving to be a monumental pain. Right, we'll go with RX 6000 series and see if we can do anything there. We'll say it's 6700. No, we don't want the auto detect feature. I need all of the INF files. Hardware info. What about GPU-Z and CPU-Z as well on here? We'll get both of those as well. I'm really hoping the screen just flashes. It's not going to, but, you know, I'd like it to. It's quick. It's bloody fast. Genuinely. For a PC that is this bodged running over USB, it is insanely fast to use. Okay, we can see quite a few voltages. There's no thermal throttling at all occurring right now, which makes sense, and it is getting cooling. I mean, it's running about 71 degrees, but there is also very little thermal management going on. It knows it's running a 13FE GPU over PCIe 4, but once again, if we can get drivers for that, that'll be impressive in itself. What does it find on CPU side performance? I don't think I can contain my excitement. This is such a stupid idea, but it is working. And I'm loving the old AMD logo here. AMD 4700S. in the BC250, 3.5 GHz Zen 2, it knows the motherboard, it knows the memory. Not looking too bad, to be honest. I mean, it is utilising all 12 threads, scoring around 350 points single core, which makes sense for a Zen 2 processor. How does that compare to something cheap? We got single core performance is slightly better than that of Sandy Bridge out of the box, and multi-core performance is about double that of a Core i7-2600. More or less the power of an 8-core Sandy Bridge processor, which I think you could get as a Xeon chip. You could read about this. You could decide, you know, I'm going to read about how to do this, or if this has been done. It does say GPU-Z does not know this graphics device yet. Very much fair enough, that. What is an AMD 13FE? Can we search that? We already knew Linux drivers exist. What does AMD 13FE actually bring us up? PCI controllers and an advert for a shoe. For older men, stable balance and shoe for walking every day. That's a scam, let's click it. Whoa, look at these shoes. I can't believe they just sold 49 of these in the last 2 hours. Let's go off that. We'll get these AMD drivers installed and unzipped, see if it detects anything. I don't think it's going to, but maybe we can bodge it into working somehow. That's the plan so far. Right, now comes the stupid part. Can we give it some form of graphical acceleration? So we run these AMD drivers. Okay, it does know it's got 8 gigs reserved for hardware, so it does recognize that 8 gigs of the memory on board here is just for the graphics card. Do you fancy unzipping the files, though? Right, AMD driver time. It's not going to detect anything. It's not going to. That's just not possible. Something went wrong. Detect AMD graphics hardware on your system configuration that is not supported. Whoa, get more details. Right, let's see if it'll install anything manually. I don't hold out great deals of hope, but it might. Let's see if we can browse our way to the AMD driver install files. Oh, it's got loads in here. Why are there terascale drivers in here? Go with a 6700M. I don't believe it's going to work. I'd really like it to, though. Oh. Oh! Oh, I nearly did! No, that was close. That had graphical acceleration for half a second. So I'm wondering if maybe there is a card this is comparable to. Let me bring up the specs. I did write them down. Got a code 43 error, which is graphics driver not available. It does a lot of reading and writing when doing these drivers, well into the hundreds of megabytes per second. Oh. Counter problem, but wouldn't install. I mean, it's not like it's going to accept stupid drivers like terascale ones, is it? Where if we choose like it's a 4870, it's going to go, oh, hang on a second, I work with these. Windows finished installing the device drivers. Clearly not working at all, but it says it is for some reason. Currently, the mobile Navi 2 drivers are the... Oh, yeah, Navi 2 tries to use the card and then just breaks. Maybe we'll download some modded drivers and see if they have any luck, but I'm not feeling particularly optimistic. Try these, try a couple more ideas, and then we'll give maybe another hour on this and see if we can get this working, but I don't really want to spend forever trying to get all of these together and working if it's not going to work. Okay, is that actually doing anything? I mean, we've got different things telling us different things all over the place. And then if we exit, Radeon T680M. It's added a T in there. What if we restart? Really, really severely doubt it's done much. Good news is thermals seem fine. The fans are working, and I don't know about us actually being able to get this iGPU to actually work. We'll try one last set of modded drivers, see if there's any hope. Right, well, with none of those actually wanting to work, why don't we move on to phase 2 of my plan to actually make this thing work on Windows, which could be even more questionable than what we're trying to do here. So just what is my next plan? I mean, we sort of went into this knowing that it's probably very unlikely we'd make any progress at all enabling the iGPU on here, well, the graphics part of the APU, using anything built into Windows. Frankly, AMD never provided the drivers, and even just getting a split second of graphical acceleration where it accepts drivers for a moment and then code 43s is more progress than I thought we'd actually make. But I have other plans, because what if we can actually get it to do something by using that M2 slot? Because M2 is just PCIe, isn't it? That should be able to talk directly to the processor. Maybe, hopefully, I don't know if this is actually going to work, this is just a bit of a bodge. But I ordered from China this adapter, which apparently should solve all our woes. I think this is about £12. It came in a massive bundle of bits that I ordered, lots of PC parts and technical bits. I've also noticed that it's speared itself with its own included screwdriver. I don't know why it's coming with a screwdriver, but this should be the saviour of this task. So what do we get in our mystery bag? We get the adapter, another adapter, and a screwdriver. And what is this adapter? On this end, we have M2 port, which should just clip in. On this end, we've got PCI Express 16 times, and it also has an included power adapter. I don't know if this is actually going to work at all. I don't know if anyone's tried this, but someone's got to be the first, so why not us? And now, let's see if we can make this do something. Okay, trying to squeeze this in is going to be a little bit tricky. Okay, it's not magnetized. I have no idea if this supports the protocols required. This could just not work. Wonderful, that's our N2 key. This is our graphics card port, powered off SATA. So then if we hook this up with a SATA connector, 75 watts over SATA. Have I got a basic display adapter we can plug this in with? And if we balance that down here, yes, this is definitely a good solution you'd only get on budget builds. So now if we turn this back on, it's turned on according to the keyboard, but I wonder if it's still doing display output via the internal port. Are we going to have to try and port the graphics through? So graphics card is plugged in down here. That is all clipped in, isn't it? We've got the RX 460 here. Any sort of display signal is going to be wonderful, to be honest. Let's go to display options. Okay, I wonder if we can port the graphics through to the iGPU and see if Windows is recognizing it over... I mean, it is possible on Windows to have the power of this graphics card run through this port. It's a lot harder to do that when it doesn't know what port it's trying to display through, because it will probably lock us to 800 by 600, which is mostly why we wanted to actually utilize this in the first place. But we're in unknown territory. We are in very unknown territory. Apparently these do work according to some of the reviews. Admittedly, I have to use Google Translate to understand them. Is Windows going to be able to boot like this? Or have we broken it completely by adding this abomination? Yes, we did boot to Windows. Yes, it has recognized it. 896 unified shaders, PCIe 8x3. Wait, PCIe 8x 3.0 at 2x speed. We're asking it to do things it didn't think it could do. I didn't think this would be possible either, but this may actually work to get graphical acceleration on here. I mean, it's not going to be blazing fast. I do think this caps out at 2x speed. Okay, it has detected the RX 460 here. AMD, collect as much information on this as you want. My curiosity is now, though, will we be able to take the DisplayPort cable out of the system, plug it in here, and actually run something on it? We're going to have to redirect which way the airflow goes. So we run it. Yep, this is going to be as precarious as I thought it'd be. So now the airflow is going out this way. At the end of the day, if you do get one of these weird PlayStation 5 APUs, probably just run it on Linux, because this has been a nightmare so far, and it's just got worse. See, device manager. Okay, both of them are broken, so we're now worse off at this point than we were 5 minutes ago. Fix yourself, computer. Fix yourself. How about we can unplug the DisplayPort cable, precariously plug it in here. No, you give us nothing. Okay. Hardware and drivers, our primary graphics card is the RX 460. Thinks it has a 680M in here. What if we add a capture card from the laptop? We try and use the laptop as a second display. Maybe that'll work. We'll try that now and see what that comes up with. This is a nightmare of organization. Okay, keyboard and mouse can be run off the Baolong King adapter. That works fine, we know that. Nope, that's falling down. Windows is booting, which is nice to see. Ow. That just took off the top of my finger. It is noticeably slower running with all of this jank on here. Now we can get into Steam, and get into 3D Mark, and try to use just this. Then at least we've got a proof of concept of graphical acceleration. Aren't we kicking off the Christmas period with some real bangers? It only recognises the RX 460 as a rendering device. Run! It's taken us so long to get to this point. This is the first possible time we've had graphical acceleration actually working. It took about half an hour and then just gave up and died. More painful than I thought. I've got one last ditch attempt idea, which is what if we try and make it use Polaris drivers on the iGPU. I have no idea if this is going to work. We can try. I mean, we knew this was always going to be a nightmare, but this is proving to be almost a disaster. Is the optimism going? So it's actually installed itself as a 460. Okay, but it hasn't code 43'd. I think we're quickly realizing the answer of should you run Windows is no. Just please don't. This is a terrible idea. It's taken so long to get to this point. Can we just do Half-Life 2? Half-Life 2 is like the go-to, will it just run? The best way of seeing if this is doing anything is I can just touch the graphics card to see if it warms up. Okay, GPU 100% GPU utilization, the CPU is doing nothing. Okay, the RX 460 is getting warm. I think it's actually working. Oh, that's taken so long. And we are limited in resolution, we can't change it. It doesn't output a display. I've tried multiple times on-screen and off-screen recording, but we have GPU acceleration badly, and I don't want to touch it while it's working, so this is it. This is what we've got. I knew that RX 460 would be useful for something. The RX 460 is doing it! 3D utilization! Okay, this is good, this is good. So we've got 3D utilization going on. It's just a shame we can't touch the resolution, but I'm taking this as a win. After how long this has taken, this is it. This is good, this is everything. Is this a world first? Has anyone tried this before? I'd imagine if someone has, they probably figured it out better than me. If not, this is a good basis to work off. Well, 3D marks a write-off. It's just not going to work. Fair enough, it is quite a complex benchmark. But what we do know is that RX 460 is outputting a signal over the built-in DisplayPort connector from here. There's no point having this HDMI in here, it's not actually working or doing anything and I can't enable it. But we have proof of concept. PlayStation 5 APU extended to another graphics card that's then running back into it and out its own display that is limited to 800 by 600. It has taken 6 hours? Maybe 7 hours? The power of editing, huh? Makes it look amazing. We can carry on with the rest of the video. That's the good news at least. Let's go from there. So we finally got everything all done, and this genuinely did take me absolutely hours. It wasn't until the next day that we actually got around to doing some proper testing and benchmarking, which is what's coming up. So to recap, what we've done is we've taken the AMD BC250, which for those of you that haven't seen the original video where I actually go in and explain the specifications, I'll throw up a quick graph from last video. It's nothing fantastic, but it very much is just a completely cut down PlayStation 5 APU sold to you on a consumer board that is just wild, wacky, and doesn't feel like it should actually be a real thing. Now, over on Linux, we did actually get this thing running, as it does have some degree of actual driver support. Over on Windows, as you've probably gathered from the 7 hours worth of footage that I've cut down into 20 minutes, it does not. So in terms of actually being able to enable the iGPU on this, which would have been very nice, the closest we got to actual graphical acceleration was telling Windows that it was a mobile Navi chipset. From there it would enable graphical acceleration for almost half a second, and they would then promptly code 43 and decide it doesn't want to work. So what we've done instead is hijack off the NVMe port a PCIe lane, which is then running down to an extension card, which is also running an AMD RX 460. There's no particular reason why we're running the RX 460, but I had it on hand, and it's not going to saturate the very limited bandwidth we have available just running it like this. But at the end of the day, we have actually managed to get this thing running with what is some degree of graphical acceleration. Now, Windows is meant to deal with these dual GPU situations, but in my experience, it never deals with it particularly very well unless it is something that is fully supported by the drivers, more so than Windows. Now, the AMD drivers do recognize that there is a second graphics card on here, but it only wants to allow throughput from that RX 460 if we register that iGPU as a Polaris-based card. Makes sense, it thinks it's the same architecture, and even though it's not applying drivers, it gives it the idea that we can at least output a display through the onboard display ports. There's no way of actually getting a display out of the RX 460. I've tried all the ports, I've tried fiddling around with the BIOS, I've tried second displays, I've tried plenty of things that didn't make it into that 20 minutes, and there was just no way of doing it. But it does seem that we have the system working, and actually it can accelerate things on a graphics card. Not very well, but it can. With all of that out of the way though, and everyone sort of understands what we've done here, I have done my best to try and go through and benchmark it like this. Now, I did do a little bit of Googling to see if anyone had ran these on Windows, and it turns out there hasn't been much research done, mostly because why would you when it's so well supported on Linux, and there very clearly are no graphics drivers available. But still, for the sake of curiosity, and the hundreds of people that ask me why aren't you running it on Windows, well, I've done the best I can to get it all working. Everything on the board does actually work. We can get graphical acceleration, which varies from title to title, and there are different things you can change in Windows that have absolutely no effect on the multi-GPU aspect of this. Trust me, I tried configuring around things with the inbuilt graphics menu that Windows now comes with. Sometimes it works, other times it really just doesn't. But finally, I have the answers for you. If you really want to go through all the pain and suffering this has taken to take your PlayStation 5 APU and you want to run Windows on it, and you've gone to all of these lengths, just what kind of performance will you get if you run it like this? And there's only one way to find out, and that is with the benchmarks. Now, starting off the benchmarks, we have GTA 5 Enhanced Edition running with the lowest settings in 800 by 600. Now, all of the benchmarks you're going to be seeing today are in 800 by 600 because we have absolutely no way at all of controlling resolution on this device. We can't make it go any higher than 800 by 600. I tried forcing custom display timings, it just doesn't work. This is the maximum we can go up to. And how did it work? Well, we saw 14 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 13 FPS. And you might be looking at this thinking, well, that's not using the graphics card at all. I was monitoring things, and it was utilising the RX 460, but for some reason it capped the utilisation at around 25%. So although it was utilising it and you could feel it warming up, it just wasn't generating all too much of a frame rate. Despite the Steam overlay up in the top right confirming it was utilising things at 100%, that 100% in reality was only 25 at sometimes even 15%. So unfortunately, when it comes to GTA 5, even with a setup like this is the best I could get it running. Once again, I did spend a good hour or so trying to tweak things around and see if I could get better utilization, but I just simply couldn't. In case there was any wonder though about if we move back to the legacy version and we're no longer utilising DirectX 12, is there anything we could do to actually improve performance here? And unfortunately, there was nothing we could do. It ran exactly the same despite being the older version of the game running in DirectX 11. Now, I did go through the INI file to try and confirm that it was utilising the RX 460, and I had made sure it was actually utilising the one that was specifically running off the NVMe lane. Once again, we were seeing utilisation on the graphics card, but it wasn't enough to actually make the game playable. It capped itself around 15 to 20%. It's almost like there's an internal VSync being applied, but there isn't, because if we move it into a windowed mode, we do see a slight uptick in the average, which almost confirms it's not some sort of weird VSync going on. It's just purely that the graphics card isn't being allowed to do anything. For those that are curious, because we always do benchmark GTA Online, I'm not going to give it its own section here. For once, GTA Online ran the exact same as it did in single player, despite being a massive 32-player lobby. Not really saying much when you're only getting 14 FPS, but it is something to keep in mind. Oh, and also you can at least run GTA Online when you're running Windows. You can't actually play that when you're running this on Linux, at least not from my experience. Given the luck that we had running Source Engine games, I tried to run Counter-Strike 2, just to see what things were doing here. And even with low settings in, once again, 800 by 600, the Source 2 engine just doesn't seem to scale well across to a secondary graphics card as much as the original Source Engine games do. So if you play something like Counter-Strike Go or Counter-Strike Source, or even the original Counter-Strike by all means, it will actually run quite well. But when it comes to Counter-Strike 2 and the Source 2 engine, unfortunately there was no dice. I tried to do some configuring around and not much was happening. It did have something that intrigued me though, which is sort of how you know it's doing some degree of rendering, is these GCN cards always have a weird stutter that occurs on the first run of the benchmark, and it's when all of the bombs go off in the workshop benchmark. And these stutters still occurred, so I knew it was running on the RX 460 even before I'd gone back and checked to make sure it was, because it was acting like a GCN card. It's only a little point, but it's worth keeping in mind that now we've got the quirks of GCN without any of the perks. But when things worked, they did actually work surprisingly well. If we move things back to the most intensive of Source Engine games there are, with Black Mesa, you can see that we've got 79 FPS on average, with 1% lows down to 65 FPS, while utilising ultra settings in, once again, 800 by 600. Now, it did actually look pretty good despite the limited resolution, and actually ran surprisingly well with 100% utilization on the graphics card. So it's good to see that at least there is some sort of proof of concept that it will work. It's just a shame that it's almost sporadic and it's mostly sourcing games that accept this source setup and go, yeah, that's completely normal, I work with that. Which really is a testament to the source engine, but also just goes to show how janky this is. So it does work, there is graphical acceleration here, and even when we really stress it out, because Black Mesa can be a very, very intensive game to run, that can even bring some moderner flagships down to their knees with higher settings and higher resolutions. But it's just a shame that this shows that it could do something, it's just not able to most of the time. Now, Bannerlord really was proving an interesting one, because you're probably looking at that benchmark and going, oh right, another 10 FPS benchmark. But what is more important is Bannerlord's built-in benchmark actually monitors both your CPU side performance and your GPU side performance to show you the limiting factor. Yes, that's right, the Bannerlord benchmark is not only exceptionally well optimized, it's actually quite useful for testing things like this. Because we can see the GPU is churning out anywhere from 60 to 80 FPS with the default settings it chose, but the CPU, for some reason, is claiming it's not able to do anything, which got me to investigate core parking and things like that to make sure the cores were being utilized, but as you can imagine, the cores on this are being utilized. It's just something weird is going on in between that is just not letting it generate a frame rate. The game was actually utilizing, on the outside of this, quite a few cores at quite high clock speeds, but there was no thermal throttling going on. We were running between 60 to 75 degrees. It's just another point of contention and confusion, because the game knows the performance is there, but it's saying the CPU side is a limiting factor, but we already know it's not, because I can see it's utilizing it absolutely fine. Tomb Raider I wanted to throw in to think, maybe something DirectX 10 based might have a chance. It's sort of in that weird in-between level when people were running things in Crossfire and SLI. There was the tiniest little bit of hope that maybe this would do something, and unfortunately, no, it still ran at 14 FPS completely locked. One core on the processor was completely maxed out because it was only generating 14 FPS. The graphics card warmed up, but it should be able to run this with higher settings. So once again, similar issues to GTA 5, it just capped the frame rate, and that's all it was really doing. Moving things back, and I really did have some degree of hope that Fable The Lost Chapters would work, but unfortunately, and I have no clue why it was doing this, it would just cut mouse support so we couldn't get in-game. It wasn't crashing, and the GPU was showing actually good levels of utilization in the menus when it was actually loading us into the game. But the problem is we have to click the left button to actually get in-game, and we couldn't. I tried unplugging everything, I tried a secondary mouse, I tried absolutely everything I could. I tried DXWin to run it in a windowed mode because I was just looking for anything that would run at this point. And yeah, Fable Lost Chapters, you're stuck with just a menu that you can't pass through. Thing is, you could click outside of this, you just couldn't click in-game for some reason. But you know what's gonna work? You know what's just gonna see this set of hardware and go, you know what, I work well on this? Fallout 4. Fallout 4 is a nightmare of a game to benchmark, and this is what I mean. We had been through quite a few tests, some that I've even omitted from the benchmarks because you don't need me to go through and tell you, oh yeah, that doesn't work again, because that's what a lot of this was. And I thought, you know what, Fallout 4, that's a nightmare to benchmark, and it worked. It doesn't even really support 4x3 at these resolutions, at least not from what I remember, but it launched up in what it called native mode and ran at 45 FPS on average with 1% lows down to 32 FPS with ultra settings, once again in 800x600 because of the capped resolution. It worked alright, it was quite responsive, the graphics card was at 100% utilization, those God rays really do take it out of little cards like this, especially when they're running off an NVME port. So yes, Fallout 4 works. I have no clue why. This engine is just a mess, and apparently it will even work on sets of hardware like this quite well. One of the last more modern and more intensive titles I wanted to test was Cyberpunk 2077, because I thought maybe there's something we can do. It's got FSR, it's got frame gen, maybe we can get it to do something here. And unfortunately, no dice. The internal FSR options and render select options wouldn't actually change anything. I even tried to use lossless scaling at one point to try and force it onto rendering on the RX 460 more, and all that did was incur a load of ghosting and run the exact same. So Cyberpunk 2077 I did hold out a good degree of hope for, because it's a decently well optimized game with tons of options, especially when it comes to actual rendering device. So Cyberpunk 2077 unfortunately is a no-go here on the BC250 if you're going to run it on Windows. But finally, can it run BeamNG? And yes, it can, with high settings in 800x600, with 46 FPS on average and 1% lows down to 33 FPS. This game I just launched on a last-ditch attempt to try and run more stuff on here, and it worked. Once again, it's a good proof of concept to show that this is feasible if the title supports this weird rendering method, which apparently BeamNG does. I also thought, you know what, it's a good substitute for Crysis, because this game originally started on the CryEngine. There's a fun fact for you all. Either way, BeamNG was about where I wanted to round things off with the benchmarks, because I tried so many titles that didn't get included here, because some wouldn't even start, like Project Zomboid wouldn't even start, Minecraft I couldn't get to start, but there was titles like BeamNG that would, so there you go. If a game supports it, you might actually be able to get some Windows performance like this, but it's still not going to be fantastic. So yes, overall performance here on Windows, even with a dedicated graphics card, is noticeably worse than what it was over on Linux. Genuinely, at this point, if you haven't seen the original video, our performance over on Linux is more or less outstanding. Over here on Windows, admittedly we aren't actually able to utilize the iGPU, but even then we're pretty much saturating the PCIe bus that we've got access to with this RX 460. Trust me, I've got some tests on that later. At the end of the day, if a game does support this janky setup, well, it's not a terrible idea if you're desperate to run Windows, but let's be honest, it's a pretty bad idea. You're capped at 800x600, there's quite a lot more screen tearing than it should be because of the janky method we're getting a display out of this. I cannot even begin to tell you how much of a nightmare this was to get this through a capture card, because, trust me, it's not displaying in quite a normal way. It's displaying at 64Hz locked, which is harder to capture than you'd think. Either way, at the end of the day, Fallout 4 was a standout, BeamNG was a standout, Black Mesa was a standout, and virtually everything else was disappointing. I thought there'd be some hope with Fable the Lost Chapters, there wasn't. I can't really say there's any positives for overall gaming performance because it took me so long to get these results, and they're not good. I mean, a GT 210 can technically run GTA 5 better, because at least it'll respond to the settings changes. Here, it doesn't really do anything. Lower settings, higher settings, doesn't matter what you're running, it's ran about the same. Now, I'm including this section just to get it out of the way, because I'm sure there will be a handful of people saying, why didn't you do this and why didn't you do that? Yes, I tried lossless scaling to force it to scale on another graphics card, which should default it as the rendering device. I touched on it briefly in the Cyberpunk segment. It has no effect. If the game doesn't want to utilize the card properly in this fashion, it simply wouldn't from my experience. Another point to notice is that Windows does actually let you just select what graphics card you want it to use as the render device once you provide it the exe you are going to be rendering it from. This doesn't really work. Some titles would actually they'd run slightly better if you chose it all manually and set it up this way, but for the vast majority there was no performance difference change. Another point people are going to say is, well, are you sure it's not just the RX 460's too weak? Well, no. We've got an entire video on the RX 460 and the performance you can get out of this card, so it isn't the RX 460. I did try another graphics card. I tried both something that was AMD Fiji based with the R9 Fury Nano, and I also tried running it with a Navi based graphics card, which was the 6700 XT, which is pretty close to what a PlayStation 5 actually is. It's in that sort of architectural region. The point being that you would see very similar performance regardless of the card you were using, because we are dealing with very limited PCIe bandwidth from the NVMe port, on a board that doesn't really support what we're doing. I mean, really, you should be able to hijack a PCIe lane and force that as a render output. We have no way of doing this. If people are desperate, I am quite curious to see, in an actual normal system, if you can run a graphics card over NVMe. That might be a fun project for next week or something, but for the sake of the video today, and all the people that are asking about Windows 11 on this just doesn't seem to be tweakable any more than this. Then again, I've only spent, what, a week on this? Someone may have more time and more ideas, and they might stumble across something that does work. We've stumbled across things that don't sound like they should work, and bodge them into working. So if anyone wants to give this a go, please be my guest to carry on from here, because it's been a frustrating week even getting to this point. What else is there to say? Well, there were some advantages to the system on Windows. Wi-Fi worked a lot better here than it did over on Linux. Yes, that will probably upset some people, but trust me, there are issues with Wi-Fi on Linux. I've tried different Wi-Fi cards, and sometimes it just breaks. Yes, you can fix it. Yes, I have done fixing on it before, but it didn't break here on Windows. It's the smallest of wins we can have, but yes, Wi-Fi does work surprisingly well on the system. Other than that, AMD VCE support does work via the M2 port because we have AMD VCE on the RX 460. It can handle encoding and decoding. Once again, there's not really an advantage to that because you can do that over on Linux quite easily with OBS and Handbrake as well, utilizing the iGPU on that system. But here, well, yes, it does work. It wasn't spectacular. H.265 would also cause it to be very underutilized, but H.264 did utilize the RX 460 rather well. These are the most mediocre talking points I've got, but I wanted to get as much comprehensive testing done as I could. Thermals checked out fine on the system, there was no issues with heat, we had plenty of airflow, the CPU was cool, the memory was cool, this graphics card, the RX 460, was cool because I could monitor it by very literally putting my hand on it, the same as I did with the actual BC250 heatsink. So yeah, it's been a wild one, hasn't it? So there we have it, the PlayStation 5's APU running Windows. And do I recommend it? Well, not really, no. I mean, I went into this knowing full well it'd be very unlikely we'd be able to do anything at all, but that's also part of the reason that I thought ahead and ordered things like adapters to hijack off the NVMe port and run a graphics card, so at least we could try and do something. Because, let's be honest, this video would be a lot more boring if I went, oh, well, we can't install graphics drivers. Good luck, everyone, because that'd be boring. I had to at least try and do something, so I think at least that deserves a bit of commendation, maybe. Who really knows? At the end of the day, it's been a fun one. It's been a fun project. It's been a very long project. But I've answered the question. After so many people are asking me, why didn't you just run Windows? This is why. It does not support Windows, and likely never will support Windows, unless someone manages to maybe modify Navi drivers to recognize this as what it did work best as a mobile Navi chipset. Then maybe there's some degree of hope out there for us. I've got around Code 43 problems myself, but never on something as modern as this. Usually it's a lot older hardware. So I think we've covered everything we need to cover. Yes, it will run games. Yes, you will have to run an external graphics card. No, it will not run well. Some games will work okay, others won't, and you will only be able to use the internal graphics port for a resolution of 800 by 600 at 64 Hz. So I hope your capture card or your monitor actually supports that, because some monitors I tried didn't. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I hope this has been fun. Lots of people enjoy watching me struggle and suffer my way through these projects, but eventually getting there and getting something made in the end. You can always count on there being the benchmarks, and it was a struggle, but there was. Anyway, thank you all very much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and good night.